In a squalid changing room attached to a Polish concentration camp, dozens of Jewish women were slowly getting undressed. They had been finally promised a safe passage to Switzerland after surviving the liquidation of the Warsaw ghetto. But before they crossed the border, the train screeched to a halt outside the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, and the passengers on board were herded into a nearby changing room attached to the camp's gas chambers. The 26-year-old ballerina Franceska Mann, seemingly resigned to her fate, slowly started to unbutton her clothes. Soon she locked eyes with a leering Nazi guard. As the senior squad leader approached, Franceska pulled off her stiletto and struck the guard on the head, wrenching his gun from the holster and firing it at two SS guards on duty. Here's the life of Franceska Mann, and this is Crown Undone. Franceska Mannheimer Rosenberg, better known as Franceska Mann, was born on the 4th of February 1917 in Warsaw in the then Kingdom of Poland. The short-lived Polish kingdom was established by the Austro-Hungarian and German empires during the First World War, although the polity only lasted from January 1917 until November 1918, before becoming the independent Second Polish Republic. Franceska spent her teenage years dancing constantly. As soon as it opened, she studied at the dance school of the distinguished choreographer and composer Irina Prushika. Prushika's prestigious dance school, the School of Gymnastics and Artistic Dance, became one of the most renowned private dance schools in interwar Warsaw. In 1932, the school would win the international dance competition in Brussels, with Franceska individually placing fourth in a competition of 125 ballerinas. Franceska was expected to become one of the most talented classical and contemporary dancers of her generation. She was booked for performances all over Europe, but her international fame would be short-lived. The German invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939 heralded the beginning of war in Europe, and the Polish capital Warsaw was overcome just 27 days later. During the autumn of 1940, in the largest of Poland's cities and the city with the highest number of Jewish inhabitants, the German authorities established a ghetto, and soon a staggering 30% of the city's population was crowded into just 2.4% of the area of Warsaw. Established in Warsaw's traditional Jewish quarter, the ghetto covered just 1 square mile and was completely surrounded by a 10-foot-tall wall topped with broken glass and barbed wire. Nearly 400,000 Polish Jews were herded from the city centre and from surrounding smaller villages into the Warsaw ghetto, and soon it would become the largest in Nazi-occupied Europe. While the Nazis publicly proclaimed that the ghetto had been established to protect the Jewish from the anti-Semitism that was allegedly rife in Poland, non-Jewish Poles were told that the Jewish inhabitants had to be contained to stop the spread of typhus. In reality, the ghetto system was an efficient and barbaric means to bring together the Jewish population in preparation for the next step of extermination. Hired as a dancer at the Melody Palace in Warsaw, Franceska would spend her days performing for the theatre's clientele, and on one of the nights she was performing, she locked eyes with attendee Marek Rosenberg. Soon the two were married, and it's believed that Franceska gave birth to a daughter soon afterwards. Less than a year after the German invasion, Franceska and her family were forced into the Warsaw ghetto as well. The ghetto was officially sealed off from the rest of the city on the 15th of November 1940. Abraham Lewant later recalled Warsaw's miserable conditions, writing, quote, "The hunger in the ghetto was so great, was so bad that people were laying on the streets and dying." The ghetto was overcrowded and utterly squalid. Sanitation was non-existent, food was withheld, and disease was everywhere. Thousands of Jewish prisoners died each month. Between October 1940 and July 1942, 92,000 of the ghetto's inhabitants were killed by disease and starvation. In fact, the average daily food ration for Jewish Poles in 1941 was just 184 calories. Non-Jewish Poles were allowed 699 calories, while Germans were given 2,600. Around 80% of the ghetto's food had to be sourced from the black market, and the illegal trade of foodstuffs and other goods was rapidly increasing. Private workshops were set up within the ghetto, and goods were regularly smuggled in from the so-called Aryan side of the city. An official Nazi announcement was soon pinned to both sides of the ghetto's walls. It read, quote, "Jews who leave the quarter reserved for them without permission are liable to the death penalty. The same penalty awaits any person who knowingly gives shelter to such Jews." Despite the dire conditions, the already harsh treatment from Nazi officers meant that, quote, "resistance did not emerge at first. As long as there was some hope that Warsaw Jews would survive the war, collective resistance was seen as unnecessarily risky." But by the summer of 1942, everything had changed. Once 3/4 of the ghetto's population had either been deported or murdered, and the Nazis' genocide had become unmistakably obvious, plans for collective and armed resistance were devised among the ghetto's inhabitants. If we were all going to die, the Jewish captives reasoned, we may as well die while fighting. Those that remained alive in the ghetto started to build bunkers, and the Jewish Combat Organization and the Jewish Military Union were established to train its inhabitants. Those that could pass as Aryan and sneak into the non-Jewish side of Warsaw were tasked with smuggling weapons and ammunition back into the ghetto. Franceska, made to join a ghetto cleaning brigade, was one of the lucky few able to pass as Aryan. On the 19th of April 1943, on the eve of Passover, the arrival of a renewed SS and police force outside the ghetto walls signalled a new phase in the Nazi genocide. The SS were now intent on having the entire ghetto liquidated, but the Jews that were still alive inside refused to surrender. Backed by the Jewish Combat Organization and the Military Union, Jewish insurgents living in the ghetto ambushed the SS forces, throwing smuggled-in hand grenades and Molotov cocktails from sewers and windows. Marek one of the uprising's leaders, said that the insurgents were given 5 grenades, 5 Molotov cocktails and 1 pistol each. But since there was still not enough weapons for everyone inside, those that were unarmed hid in makeshift bunkers in the ghetto's basements and attics. Simar Rotem recalled that after a mine at the entry exploded, he saw, quote, "crushed bodies of soldiers, limbs flying, cobblestones and fences crumbling, complete chaos. I saw and I didn't believe. German soldiers screaming in panicky flight, leaving their wounded behind. I pulled out 1 grenade and then another and tossed them. My comrades were also shooting and firing at them. We weren't marksmen, but we did hit some. The Germans took off." Resistance lasted several weeks before the ghetto was systematically set alight, and by mid-May the Warsaw ghetto lay in ruins. In a final display of German suppression, the Warsaw Great Synagogue was blown up. The Nazis deported around 42,000 of the ghetto survivors captured during the uprising to forced labor and death camps, and at least 7,000 Jewish people were killed while fighting. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising became one of the first and largest acts of armed resistance against Nazi occupation. Somehow, a lucky few managed to evade capture and hid out in the Aryan side of Warsaw, including Franceska Mann and her daughter. After the eventual liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, the Nazis were set on ridding the city of surviving Jews, and so set a trap. Nazis and Polish collaborators spread the rumour that the remaining Jewish Poles could buy foreign passports and leave the territories occupied by Nazi Germany. In late 1941, Jewish organisations in Switzerland had begun sending documents to Warsaw in the hopes that they could help persecuted Jews emigrate to neutral countries, but instead, most of the documents were intercepted by the Gestapo. German authorities and collaborators claimed that documents issued from countries like Paraguay, Honduras, El Salvador, Peru and Chile for Jewish applicants that were no longer alive could be bought at Warsaw's Hotel Royal and then at the Hotel Polski. In some cases, the documents were sold for over $1 million, but it was just a cruel ruse, and many of the documents turned out to be forged. Franceska, alongside around 2,500 other Jews, left their hiding places to claim a passport in a last-ditch effort for survival. On the 23rd of October 1943, 1,700 of the Jewish Poles staying at the Hotel Polski after purchasing their documents boarded a train said to be bound for Switzerland, where they were told that they would be freed. Franceska, her daughter and the other Jews on board were told that they were to be exchanged for German prisoners of war. The relief must have been palpable. But instead, after hours on the squalid train, it screeched to a halt outside a long red brick building. Plumes of smoke rushed out of the complex. Unbeknownst to Franceska, the train had arrived at the notorious Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. The passengers were ordered out. Guards explained that they were to be disinfected before crossing the border to Switzerland. Auschwitz, now considered the ultimate symbol of the Holocaust, had been established by the Nazis in 1940. Between 1942 and 1944, the complex became Germany's main extermination camp, and more than 1 million Jewish people were executed within the compound. On arrival, transported prisoners crammed into windowless cattle wagons without seats, food or toilets were sorted into those who could be used for forced labour and those that would be killed immediately. Those to be exterminated were made to strip naked and were sent to showers for so-called delousing, the Nazi euphemism for the gas chambers. Zyklon B gas pellets were dropped into the sealed chambers, and the eventual death by suffocation could take more than 20 minutes. Once everyone was dead, workers, often Jews forced to work for Nazi guards, would have to enter the chambers and collect anything valuable from the piles of corpses. Teeth, hair, glasses, and artificial limbs were collected before the bodies were sent to the incinerators. This was to be Franceska and her daughter's fate too. From here, the details of what happens to Franceska next are a little blurry, but the testimony from Philipp Mueller in Eyewitness Auschwitz and the account by former Birkenau prisoner Jerzy Tabau, submitted to the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, recall similar stories. One version goes like this. Once the female passengers that arrived at Auschwitz were ordered to remove their clothing for sanitization, Franceska made a last desperate attempt to save herself and her daughter. In the bare changing room, Franceska slowly started to undress. Unbuttoning her shirt and pulling down her skirt, she may have thought back to the routine she learnt at the Melody Palace. Franceska purportedly eyed the leering Nazi senior squad leader Walter Quackenack. Quackenack stepped towards the ballerina, and before he was able to reach her, Franceska grabbed her high-heeled stiletto and with all her strength struck the guard on the forehead. As the bloodied Quackenack staggered backwards in utter shock, Franceska was able to snatch the injured guard's gun from its holster and fired 2 bullets into the roll call officer Joseph Schillinger's stomach and another into the leg of SS Sergeant Wilhelm Emmerich. According to Tabau, the other women in the changing room quickly joined the attack. One SS man allegedly had his nose torn off and another was scalped. Soon, Nazi reinforcements appeared, and Auschwitz camp commander Rudolf Hoss arrived with men and machine guns. Mueller said that all of the women involved were gunned down by Hoss's men, but another account claims that all the women were instead immediately forced into the gas chambers. While this account will never be completely verified, the Auschwitz Museum confirms that a woman shot 2 guards at the Auschwitz camp, and many believe that the woman was Franceska. Either way, by the end of the 23rd of October 1943, Franceska Mann was dead, but so too were at least 2 Nazis. That was the story of Franceska Mann, and this was Crown Undone.